Welcome to the History Maps podcast. In today's deep dive, we are examining a stack of historical sources, mostly naval logs, military analyses, and commercial records. And we are looking at a shoreline conflict that completely reshaped global trade.
Right. We are focusing on the Portuguese-Safavid Wars. This spans from 1507 to the 1630s.
Yeah, and for you listening, this is a deep dive into a century-long struggle for control over the Persian Gulf.
Which was a critical maritime choke point. It connected Europe, India, and the Middle East. And the goal here is to dissect how two fundamentally different imperial models collided in this very specific geography.
So we have the Portuguese Estado da India on one side. The sources detail a maritime network relying almost entirely on naval superiority and these fortified trading posts.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have the Safavid land empire. That was a state undergoing a massive top-down military modernization.
Right. And we will trace their shifting alliances, the tactical developments on land and sea, and the economic stakes that ultimately pulled the English East India Company into the fray.
It requires looking at the mechanics of statecraft. We are basically analyzing a clash between an undisputed master of the sea and an absolute juggernaut of the land.
Because they operated with completely different logistical foundations and, different strategic objectives.
Yeah, very different objectives.
To make sense of this conflict, we need to establish what the Portuguese were doing in the Persian Gulf in the first place. When you look at the maps provided in the sources, they are thousands of miles from Lisbon.
It is a massive logistical stretch.
Yeah, I'm looking at King Manuel I's 1505 grand strategy. The objective was not territorial conquest in the traditional sense, right?
No, not at all. The Portuguese crown lacked the manpower and resources to conquer and administer vast inland territories in Asia.
So what was the alternative?
Well, their strategy focused entirely on monopolizing the highly lucrative maritime trade. We are talking spices, silk, gold.
Right, circumventing the traditional overland routes controlled by Muslim merchant networks.
Exactly. So Manuel I identified three specific geographic choke points required to lock down the Indian Ocean.
He targeted Aden near the Red Sea, Malacca to control the routes to China, and, Hormuz at the entrance to the Persian Gulf.
Right, because if you hold those three nodes, you control the flow of goods into the Mediterranean and Europe.
And that strategy materialized as the Estado da India. They built a network of fetorias, right? These fortified trading posts.
Yeah, fetorias. And from these stone forts, they projected power using what was called the Cartaz system.
Let's look at the mechanics of this Cartaz system, because the sources describe it essentially as a maritime protection racket.
That is a very accurate way to describe it.
A merchant sailing the Indian Ocean had to purchase a pass, the Cartaz, from the Portuguese, and then pay customs duties at their forts.
And the legal framework, from the Portuguese perspective, rested on papal bulls granting them a monopoly over navigation in the region.
But in practice, the enforcement was brutal.
Extremely brutal. If a Portuguese naval patrol intercepted a local vessel operating without a cartaz, the cargo was subject to immediate confiscation.
And they sank the ships.
Yeah, the ship was frequently sunk, often with the crew still aboard.
Which is intense, especially considering they enforced this over an enormous geographic area with very few men.
Right.
Like the historical records show Afonso de Albuquerque arriving at Hormuz in September 1507 to execute this strategy. And he arrives with exactly 7 ships and roughly 500 men.
Just 500 men?
Yeah. And the local harbor is packed with defending ships sounding trumpets and cymbals to intimidate the fleet. Why doesn't Albuquerque just retreat? 500 men against an entire commercial hub seems mathematically doomed.
You would think so, but it comes down to a stark disparity in naval architecture and artillery.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, the local vessels, primarily traditional dhows, were built for merchant transport and coastal navigation in the relatively calm waters of the Gulf and the Indian Ocean.
Right, they weren't warships.
Exactly. Their hulls were often stitched together with coir rope rather than secured with iron nails.
Wow, just stitched rope. And Albuquerque's fleet consists of heavy carracks.
Heavy carracks and caravels, yeah. These were essentially floating gun platforms. They featured thick oak hulls designed to withstand the violent seas of the Atlantic.
So they could take a hit.
Oh, absolutely. And they were armed with heavy cast bronze cannons capable of delivering sustained broadside fire.
Okay, I see.
So the defending fleet at Hormuz could not penetrate the Portuguese hulls with their lighter weapons, while a single Portuguese broadside could shatter a stitched dhow.
And the sources detail the assault. Albuquerque sails right into the middle of the crowded harbor and anchors.
Right into the center of it.
Yeah, and the Portuguese forces grappled the largest defending ship, the Great Carrack of Gujarat. Just 20 Portuguese soldiers board it and capture it after heavy fighting.
Which is a notable tactical feat.
Definitely. Then they systematically burn the surrounding defending fleet. Finally, the local vizier, Kojatar, raises a white flag over the royal palace.
And the resulting treaty forced the local ruler, King Turan Shah II, into vassalage.
He agreed to pay an annual tribute, right? 15,000 zerafins in cash, along with regular tributes of horses and pearls.
Right. And Albuquerque immediately laid the first stone of a fortress on the island in October 1507, just to solidify this extraction point.
I am trying to contextualize 15,000 zerafins. This was not a token payment.
No, it represented a massive drain on the local treasury, funneling the wealth of the Gulf directly into the holds of Portuguese ships.
But Albuquerque secures this massive tribute, starts building the fort, and then, well, he simply walks away.
Right.
By January 1508, he abandons the island entirely. Why abandon a prize that lucrative?
The vulnerability of a maritime empire is always the fragility of its supply lines and, the limits of human endurance.
Meaning the men had had enough.
Yeah. Albuquerque faced a severe mutiny among his own captains. The 500 men were suffering from disease, likely scurvy and dysentery.
Oh, that is rough.
And they were critically short on fresh provisions. The captains felt Albuquerque was dangerously overextending their limited forces.
So they forced his hand.
They essentially forced him to halt construction and withdraw to India.
So a maritime force can project devastating power for a short burst, but sustaining a permanent presence requires logistical support that simply did not exist for them in 1508.
Exactly.
So the Portuguese retreat, at least temporarily, but while the ocean is briefly clear of Portuguese control, the mainland is coalescing into a new empire.
Right. We shift our focus to the emergence of the Safavid Empire.
To understand their military and political structure, the sources trace their origins to the Safaviya.
Which began as a Sufi spiritual order based in the city of Ardabil.
Under leaders like Sheikh Safi Ulman,
Yes.
and over the 14th and 15th centuries, this religious brotherhood transitions into a militarized political movement. They militarize their followers, forming the Qeshm.
And the Qeshm were nomadic Turkoman tribal cavalry units. Their name actually translates to redheads.
Right, referring to the distinctive 12-gored crimson headgear they wore.
Exactly, symbolizing their devotion to the 12 Shia imams. They were highly skilled, traditional light cavalry.
And the figure who weaponizes this force to build the state is Shah Ismail I.
Yes, he takes control of the order, and by 1501, he captures the city of Tabriz.
He officially proclaims himself Shah, founding the Safavid Empire, and then he makes a decision that immediately alters the geopolitics of the entire region.
Right. He establishes Twelver Shi'ism as the compulsory state religion.
Which is a massive shift.
It is. This decision provided a powerful, unifying ideological framework for his new empire. It clearly distinguished his state from surrounding powers.
But it also created immediate friction, right?
Severe friction, yeah, with his predominantly Sunni neighbors, particularly the expanding Ottoman Empire to the west and the Uzbeks to the east.
The sources mention a detail about the initial Portuguese reaction to the Safavids. When Portuguese commanders in India start receiving reports about Ismail I and his Qizilbash warriors, they are deeply confused by their religious practices.
Very confused.
The Portuguese are familiar with Sunni Islam from their long history of conflicts in North Africa, so when they hear about the Safavids, they mistakenly report back to Lisbon that the Safavids consider Ali to be their prophet instead of Muhammad.
It illustrates the profound intelligence gap. I mean, the Portuguese were operating on the extreme periphery of the Islamic world, intercepting trade, but they lacked a nuanced understanding of the internal theological and political dynamics shaping the mainland empires.
The empires they were attempting to extort.
Right.
And those internal mainland dynamics were brutal. In 1514, Shah Ismail faces the Ottoman Empire at the Battle of Chaldron.
This battle forces a total psychological reset for the Safavid military.
Okay, let's get into Chaldron because it seems like a turning point.
It is a watershed moment in military history. The Safavids relied entirely on their elite Qizilbash cavalry. They fought with traditional weapons, lances, swords, and bows.
Relying on speed and mobility.
Speed, mobility, and sheer physical courage. But the Ottomans, under Sultan Selim I, deployed a radically different force.
The sources describe them utilizing massed Janissary infantry, equipped with matchlock firearms.
And crucially, they deployed field artillery.
The sources note the Ottomans chaining their cannons and supply carts together to form an impenetrable barrier.
Yes. And the Safavid cavalry charged repeatedly into sustained gunfire and artillery barrages.
That sounds devastating.
It was. The Ottoman cannons decimated the Qizilbash ranks. The defeat halted Safavid expansion westward and deeply scarred their military doctrine.
They realized that traditional cavalry wasn't going to cut it anymore.
Exactly. They recognized that individual horsemanship and martial valor were completely insufficient against disciplined gunpowder units. It initiated a long, painful process of military reassessment.
And while the Safavids are dealing with the fallout from Calderon, Afonso de Albuquerque returns to Hormuz. It is now March 1515.
He is now the governor of Portuguese India, and the logistical situation has changed.
Yeah. He arrives with 27 vessels and 1,500 Portuguese troops. The fleet fires an artillery salvo so massive that a local eyewitness reported the ships appeared to be on fire.
It was a serious show of force, and Albuquerque finds the political situation on the island fractured.
Right. The ruling monarch, Shah V, and his chief minister, Reis Nureddin, are engaged in a power struggle with a domestic rival named Reis Ahmed.
So they evaluate Albuquerque's 27 warships and decide resistance is futile.
They invite Albuquerque to land.
Yeah, intending to use his military forces to eliminate Reis Ahmed.
So the Portuguese land, hoist their flag, and secure the island without a drawn-out siege.
And Albuquerque resumes building the fortress, christening it Fort Nossa Senhora da Conceição.
They establish their permanent foothold. They control the island, and the Safavids control the mainland directly across the strait. You would assume this proximity would immediately spark a war.
You would, but the immediate aftermath actually involved attempts at diplomacy.
Really?
Yeah. Both Shah Ismail I and later his successor Shah Tahmasp I recognized a shared strategic reality.
Which was the Ottoman Empire.
Exactly. They both faced a massive threat from the Ottomans. The Safavids desperately wanted European naval support to block Ottoman movements in the Red Sea.
And they wanted access to European cannons and firearms?
To counter the Ottoman artillery they faced at Calderon.
So they send envoys back and forth. The sources highlight a specific diplomatic mission in 1523. The Portuguese Viceroy of India sends an envoy named Baltazar Pessoa to the Safavid court to formalize an alliance against the Ottomans.
But the negotiations completely collapse.
Over customs duties, right?
Yeah, they collapse over fundamentally incompatible economic objectives.
The Safavids required military technology and a strategic distraction against the Ottomans.
But the Portuguese, however, were singularly focused on maximizing the revenue from their trade monopoly. They absolutely refused to concede any portion of the customs revenues from the Gulf trade to the Safavids.
They have the perfect opportunity to ally against an empire that threatens both of their existences, but they cannot reach agreement regarding trade tolls. Was this simply stubbornness, or were their state models structurally irreconcilable?
It was a structural incompatibility. I mean, the Portuguese Estado de India was not a territorial state that produced wealth through the taxation of a large population or agricultural yields.
It generated wealth exclusively through the extraction of transit tolls.
Right. To cede a share of the Hormuz customs to the Safavid Shah would undermine the entire economic justification for deploying fleets to the Indian Ocean.
And from the Safavid side.
Conversely, the Safavids viewed the Persian Gulf trade as occurring within their natural sphere of influence. They saw the Portuguese tolls as an illegal infringement on their regional sovereignty.
So there was no overlapping interest that could support a lasting treaty.
None at all.
With diplomacy stalled, the Portuguese entrenched themselves. They spend the next century as the dominant naval power in the Persian Gulf.
And the profits from this hegemony were staggering. The financial records from the 1520s indicate the Estado de India was generating profits exceeding 1 million cruzados annually.
Wow, 1 million.
Yeah, a significant portion of this wealth flowed directly from the trade tolls collected at Hormuz. To secure this revenue stream, the Portuguese actively expanded their coastal footprint.
The sources outline a specific operation in 1521. Portuguese forces partner with their vassal state, the Kingdom of Hormuz, to launch an amphibious invasion of Bahrain.
They oust the local Jabrid ruler.
Capturing Bahrain granted the Portuguese control over the highly lucrative pearl fisheries in the region.
Adding another layer of wealth extraction to their Gulf operations.
And the Safavids pushed back diplomatically. Shah Abbas I, the first attempts to implement a policy referred to as the Macareras system.
He persistently pressures the Portuguese to hand over a share of the Hormuz revenue. utilizing legal arguments claiming that Iran holds ultimate historical sovereignty over the island.
But without a fleet to threaten the Portuguese galleons, Thomas cannot enforce his claims.
No, he can't. And the geopolitical landscape grows significantly more complex by the mid-16th century.
Because the Ottoman Empire pushes south through Mesopotamia.
Right, officially capturing the port city of Basra in 1534. This altered the strategic map for the Portuguese.
They were no longer just managing a stalemate with the land-bound Safavids.
Now they had to defend the Gulf waters from Ottoman naval squadrons operating out of the Red Sea and the Tigris-Euphrates Delta.
The shifting alliance has become purely transactional. We see a situation in 1550 where the Portuguese actually deploy forces to defend Basra from Safavid sieges.
The Portuguese are fighting their potential Safavid allies to protect an Ottoman port.
Simply because maintaining the status quo in Basra served Portuguese trade interests.
Pragmatism dictated every military deployment. And, the Portuguese also faced a major political shift back in Europe that impacted their operations.
From 1580 to 1640, Portugal and Spain were unified under the Iberian Union.
Ruled by Philip II of Spain and his successors.
The sources suggest this union altered the resource allocation for the Indian Ocean.
Spanish strategic priorities were heavily focused on managing their vast empire in the Americas, suppressing rebellions in the Netherlands, and contesting the Mediterranean with the Ottomans.
So the Portuguese operations in the east were frequently starved of men and capital.
Yet, despite limited reinforcements from Lisbon or Madrid, the Portuguese maintained their hold on the Gulf, utilizing a light footprint strategy.
The garrison at the massive Fort Nossa Senhora da Conceição on Hormuz typically consisted of only 400 soldiers.
Just 400 men.
400 men projecting power over vast sea lanes and dictating terms to regional economies. I look at the map and picture it, well, kind of like a moat in a castle.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it.
The Safavids controlled the castle, meaning the vast mainland of Persia. The Portuguese controlled the moat, the waters of the Persian Gulf.
And the Safavids could not cross the moat because they lacked warships.
And the Portuguese had no desire to enter the castle because there was zero profit in trying to march 400 men into the Iranian plateau.
Exactly.
But the underlying question remains for you as a listener. How sustainable is a 400-man garrison against an empire that spans from the Caucasus to Afghanistan?
It remains sustainable precisely as long as the empire inside the castle remains technologically and organizationally incapable of contesting the water.
The Portuguese relied on a massive asymmetry in naval technology.
However, that asymmetry was about to be challenged by a fundamental reorganization of the Safavid state.
That reorganization is driven by Shah Abbas I. He takes the throne in 1588 at the age of 16.
And he inherits an empire in active crisis.
The Ottomans are seizing territory in the west, the Uzbeks are launching raids from the east, and his own Qizilbash tribal leaders operate with near-total autonomy.
Frequently rebelling against the crown, Abbas recognizes the old system is failing.
Because reliance on the Qizilbash tribal levies was a structural flaw.
A huge one. The primary loyalty of a Qizilbash warrior was to his specific tribal emir, not to the central authority of the Shah.
So if a tribal leader disagreed with the Shah's policies, he simply withheld his cavalry from a campaign.
Right. To secure his borders and centralize his authority, Abbas needed a standing army, funded directly by the royal treasury and loyal exclusively to him.
He addresses this by redesigning the Safavid military machine from the ground up. He creates the Gulam Corps.
The sources describe this as a force of 10,000 to 15,000 men.
They were primarily Christian converts originating from the Caucasus regions, specifically Georgia and Circassia.
They were enslaved, forcibly converted to Islam, and trained as elite cavalry and musketeers.
The implementation of the Gulam Corps fundamentally shifted the domestic balance of power.
Because these soldiers were severed from their geographic roots and possessed no tribal affiliations within Persia, their wealth, status, and survival depended entirely on Shah Abbas.
By elevating the Gulams to high military and administrative positions, Abbas neutralized the political power of the Qizilbash emirs.
He centralizes the state through slave soldiers.
But Abbas also addresses the tactical failures exposed decades earlier at Chaldiran. He dramatically expands the gunpowder units.
He establishes a permanent infantry force of 20,000 to 60,000 Tafangshi, which translates to matchlock musketeers.
Furthermore, he creates a dedicated corps of 12,000 Tupchi.
Those are specialized artillerymen tasked with managing field cannons.
To accelerate this technological leap, Abbas utilized foreign expertise. In 1598, An English expedition arrives in Persia, notably featuring two brothers, Anthony and Robert Shirley.
The Shirley brothers operate effectively as early modern defense contractors.
They arrive at the Safavid court and offer to completely upgrade the local military capabilities.
And they served as crucial conduits for European military science,
The sources say they introduced Western infantry drills.
emphasizing the regimented formations necessary to maximize the effectiveness of volley fire with slow-loading matchlocks.
More importantly, they provided advanced techniques for cannon founding.
They assisted the Safavid engineers in casting reliable bronze and iron artillery pieces that could match the quality of Ottoman and European weapons.
The modernization yields immediate results. By 1603, Abbas uses this new gunpowder army to push back the Ottomans, successfully reclaiming crucial territory like Tabriz.
And looking south toward the Gulf, by 1602, Safavid forces managed to launch a localized amphibious assault to expel the Portuguese garrison from the island of Bahrain.
The capture of Bahrain demonstrated growing Safavid ambition.
But it was executed over a very short stretch of water.
Right. Abbas now possesses a massive modern gunpowder army. He has tens of thousands of disciplined musketeers and heavy siege artillery. The obvious question arises, why doesn't he just march this army down to the coast, point his newly cast cannons at Hormuz, and take the island himself?
Well, the physical geography of the Persian Gulf renders a purely land-based assault impossible.
Because Hormuz is an island.
Exactly, located roughly 5 miles off the mainland coast. You cannot march infantry across the Strait of Hormuz. You must transport them in boats.
And while an army is in transit across open water in shallow draft transport vessels, they are entirely defenseless against Portuguese galleons.
A single Portuguese warship could sink dozens of troop transports before they ever reached the beaches of Hormuz.
And the logistics of the artillery present an even greater hurdle.
Precisely. To breach the thick stone walls of Fort Nossa Senhora da Conceição, the Safavids required heavy siege artillery on the island itself.
Transporting massive cast iron and bronze cannons across a strait controlled by a hostile deep-water fleet, well, that is a logistical impossibility without your own warships.
You need them to escort the transports and suppress the enemy naval fire.
So Abbas has the weapons, he has the soldiers, but he cannot cross the moat. He requires a navy.
And building a deep-water fleet capable of challenging the Portuguese requires decades of infrastructure development. Shipyards, seasoned navigators, naval gunners.
He does not have decades.
Yeah.
So he decides to rent a navy. He turns to the English.
The underlying motivation here is heavily driven by economics. Shah Abbas had established a strict royal monopoly over the production and sale of Persian silk, which commanded exorbitant prices in European markets.
His primary fiscal objective was to sell this silk directly to European merchants.
But the geography of the trade routes worked against him.
The traditional overland caravan routes passed directly through Ottoman territory.
Right, so every time Safavid silk went west, Ottoman customs agents extracted a toll, effectively forcing Abbas to fund the military of his primary enemy.
The alternative maritime route south through the Persian Gulf was completely blockaded by the Portuguese at Hormuz.
So Abbas needed a maritime partner who possessed heavily armed ships and who inherently opposed the Iberian monopoly.
The English East India Company fit that profile perfectly.
The EIC was aggressively expanding its commercial operations into the Indian Ocean, actively seeking markets outside the Portuguese and Spanish spheres of influence.
In 1616, the EIC established a trading factory at the port of Jask, located outside the immediate chokehold of Hormuz.
Specifically to purchase Persian silk.
The relationship formalizes rapidly. By 1619, an EIC agent named Edward Cunnock negotiates a formal treaty directly with Shah Abbas.
This treaty guarantees the English access to silk purchases.
And Abbas keenly observed the capabilities of the English vessels.
These were heavily armed merchantmen, carrying enough artillery to deter Portuguese patrols.
By 1621, Abbas sees a strategic opening. He recognizes the EIC's growing frustration with the Portuguese, who constantly attempted to blockade English shipping and force them to submit to the Cartaz system.
So Abbas maneuvers the English into a corner. He essentially states that if the EIC wants continued access to the silk monopoly, they must utilize their ships to help him conquer Hormuz.
The sources detail the agreement negotiated in late 1621. It outlines highly specific terms for a joint military operation.
The terms reflect a calculated division of risk and reward. They agreed to an equal 50-50 division of all plunder and spoils taken from the fortress and city of Hormuz.
Moving forward, the EIC would receive one-third of all customs duties collected at the mainland port that would replace Hormuz.
The English demanded the repatriation of any Christian prisoners captured during the siege.
Crucially, the Safavids committed their forces to defend English shipping in the Gulf from any future Portuguese retaliation. I look at the legal and corporate structure of the EIC at this time. They are a joint stock company, operating on profit margins and shareholder returns.
Right, they are not an official branch of the English Royal Navy.
Furthermore, England and Portugal are not officially at war in 1621. By agreeing to bombard a Portuguese fortress, the EIC directors are risking a major diplomatic incident.
One that could spark a war in Europe. The directors in London had to weigh extreme variables. Attacking a Catholic fortress without royal sanction carried immense political risk.
However, the prospect of securing an unbreakable monopoly on the Persian silk trade, combined with the immediate infusion of capital from looting the wealthiest trade hub in the East, well, it outweighed the geopolitical dangers.
Shah Abbas brilliantly weaponized the commercial rivalry between the English and the Portuguese to achieve his own state-building goals.
The Safavids secure their naval transport and the troops mobilize. The powder keg is fully assembled.
But the historical irony is that the Portuguese command provides the actual spark that ignites the war by attempting a reckless expansion at the worst possible moment.
We look to the orders issued in January 1619 by King Philip II. He instructs a Portuguese commander named Rui Freire de Andrade to construct a new fortress on Qeshm.
Qeshm is a large island situated extremely close to Hormuz. The strategic logic emanating from Madrid was sound on paper. Hormuz lacked sufficient fresh water and relied heavily on wells located on Qeshm.
So securing Qeshm meant securing the lifeline of the Hormuz garrison.
But the local intelligence contradicts the orders from Madrid.
The Portuguese governor in the region, Fernão de Albuquerque, strongly warns Rui Freire against the operation.
The governor understands the political climate on the mainland. He argues that landing troops and building a fort on Qeshm will immediately be interpreted by Shah Abbas as an act of war,
triggering a conflict before the Portuguese have gathered sufficient naval assets to deal with the rising English threat.
Despite the warnings from the local governor, Rui Freire de Andrade proceeds with the mandate.
In May 1621, utilizing a force composed of 1,000 Portuguese soldiers and 1,000 locally conscripted Hormuzi men, he lands on Qeshm and begins constructing the fortifications.
Shah Abbas reacts exactly as predicted.
He views the military construction on Qeshm as an unacceptable territorial infringement and a clear casus belli.
He orders a Safavid force, commanded by Abdullah Khan, to cross the narrow channel and besiege the Portuguese positions on the island.
The Safavid infantry surround the half-built fort, digging trenches to avoid the Portuguese musket fire.
However, as we discussed regarding amphibious warfare, the Safavids struggled to deliver a decisive blow against the stone walls without heavy artillery support from the sea.
The stalemate breaks when the English squadron arrives in the Gulf. Rui Freire de Andrade recognizes his vulnerable position and attempts to negotiate a truce with the English commander, Edward Monnox.
The negotiations fail. The English ships maneuver into position and open fire, bombarding the Qeshm fort with heavy naval guns.
The bombardment collapses the Portuguese defenses. The position becomes untenable, and Rui Freire is forced to surrender his entire force.
He's taken prisoner and brought aboard the English ship, the Lion.
The sources note a significant casualty during this exchange. The famous English explorer and navigator William Baffin, known for his attempts to find the Northwest Passage, is killed while taking surveying measurements during the bombardment of Qeshm.
The decision to fortify Qeshm proves to be a catastrophic strategic blunder for the Portuguese.
It divided their already limited manpower, overextended their fragile logistical supply lines, and handed Shah Abbas the perfect pretext to initiate the war.
While Portuguese naval defenses were disorganized and divided.
Before we analyze the main siege at Hormuz, the sources provide a detailed narrative regarding the fate of the captured Portuguese commander, Rui Freire de Andrade.
It provides a compelling look at the norms of captivity and maritime operations.
He is held as a high-value prisoner aboard the Lion, which is sailing toward the port of Surat on the Indian coast, likely to arrange his transport back to London.
His treatment aboard the English vessel is remarkably accommodating, reflecting his status as an officer.
The ship's master, James Beversham, and the cook, Thomas Winterbourne, ensure he is provided with excellent rations and quarters.
The English command views him as a valuable geopolitical asset. intending to exchange him for English personnel currently held captive by the Portuguese in Macau.
Rui Freire, however, refuses to accept his transport to London. The sources detail his meticulously planned escape.
When the Lion anchors off the coast of Surat, he initiates his plan.
He leverages the amicable relationship he has built with his captors and hosts a lavish Easter Sunday feast for the English crew.
The timing is critical. During the feast, he arranges for one of his loyal servants to secretly lace the English crew's wine supply with a powerful sleeping narcotic procured locally.
The English sailors partake heavily in the spiked wine, and the crew soon falls into a deep, drug-induced stupor.
In the dead of night, Frere and 3 of his companions slip onto the deck and lower themselves into the ship's small skiff.
The escape is not entirely silent. A few alert English watchmen detect the movement and sound the alarm.
Other English boats are rapidly deployed to give chase in the darkness.
To evade capture, Frere and his men are forced to abandon the skiff. They jump into the dark ocean and attempt to swim toward the distant shoreline.
The physical toll is severe. One of his men drowns during the swim.
But Frere survives the currents, reaches the shore, and manages to evade the local cavalry patrols dispatched by the English to hunt him down.
It is a massive feat of physical endurance and tactical deception. He escapes captivity and eventually makes his way back to a Portuguese command post.
However, his individual survival does not alter the strategic disaster he engineered.
His initial stubbornness in executing the orders at Qeshm doomed the entire Portuguese defensive network in the Gulf.
By losing his command and a significant portion of his troops at Qeshm, he left the primary fortress at Hormuz critically vulnerable to the combined Anglo-Persian assault.
And the Safavids are entirely prepared to exploit that vulnerability.
With Qeshm secured, the Portuguese garrison reduced, and the command structure in chaos, the combined armada turns its full attention to the ultimate objective, the island of Hormuz.
The massive deployment commences on the 9th of February, 1622.
The Safavid commander, Imam Qali Khan, mobilizes a force of roughly 3,000 regular troops.
Transporting this army requires the full capacity of the English fleet, commanded jointly by Captains Blythe and Waddell.
The naval contingent consists of 5 heavily armed warships and 4 smaller pinnaces. Combined, they bring a staggering 400 heavy naval guns to bear on the island.
The mechanics of this joint operation highlight a perfect division of military labor.
Right. The English act as the heavy artillery and the blockade force, while the Safavids provide the infantry required to take the ground.
The Safavid troops disembark onto the island and immediately establish extensive siege lines.
They begin the grueling process of digging sap trenches, slowly zigzagging their way toward the towering walls of Fort Nossa Senhora da Conceição,
intending to plant subterranean gunpowder mines to breach the bastions.
Simultaneously, the English ships establish a tight naval blockade around the island.
Their objective is twofold: prevent any relief ships or supplies from reaching the garrison from the Portuguese headquarters in Goa, and systematically bombard the fortress defenses from the sea.
The naval engagement within the harbor seals the fate of the defenders. The English ships utilize their superior firepower to engage and sink the remaining Portuguese galleons anchored at Hormuz.
The destruction of the Portuguese fleet inside the harbor is the decisive moment.
Because the fundamental flaw of an island fortress model is its absolute reliance on sea control.
Right. Once the English neutralized the Portuguese vessels, the 400-man garrison was completely isolated.
They were trapped behind stone walls, subjected to continuous artillery fire from the English ships, and facing encroaching Safavid siege works on land.
The siege is a brutal war of attrition. It drags on for 10 grueling weeks under the intense heat of the Gulf.
The conditions inside the fort rapidly deteriorate. The sources cite severe shortages of fresh water, rotting provisions, and rampant disease spreading among the trapped soldiers and civilians.
The psychological and physical toll breaks the defenders. On the 22nd of April, the desperate Portuguese garrison mutinies against their own remaining officers, demanding an end to the suffering.
The formal surrender of the fortress is signed on the 4th of May, 1622.
The division of the massive wealth stockpiled inside Hormuz is executed exactly as outlined in the 1621 treaty.
The physical assets, the captured merchandise, the gold, and the bronze artillery pieces are divided equally between the Safavid command and the East India Company agents.
The Safavids claimed total sovereignty over the island. They made a highly calculated strategic decision.
Rather than garrison the fortress themselves, they ordered the complete demolition of the Portuguese fortifications.
By leveling the fort, they ensured that no future maritime power could ever use Hormuz as a base of operations against the Persian mainland.
The East India Company secures their long-term objective. Shah Abbas issues a farman, an official imperial decree granting the EIC perpetual rights to half the customs revenues at the designated mainland port.
Which Abbas renames Bandar Abbas in his own honor.
The diplomatic fallout in London plays out exactly as the EIC directors feared. When news of the successful siege of a Catholic fortress reaches England, the political establishment reacts aggressively.
Both the Duke of Buckingham, who serves as Lord High Admiral, and King James I express deep anger.
But the sources clarify that their anger is not driven by moral outrage over the violence.
They are furious because the East India Company engaged in a highly lucrative military operation without securing royal sanction, meaning the crown did not automatically receive a cut of the plunder.
King James famously issues a complaint stating that he repeatedly protected the company from the diplomatic protests of the Spanish ambassador, yet received nothing from the sack of Hormuz.
To resolve the political crisis and secure their newly won trade rights, the EIC directors are forced to pay a massive bribe of £10,000 to the Duke of Buckingham and an additional £10,000 directly to King James.
The corporate bribes are paid, the treaty holds, and the century-long Portuguese dominance of the Gulf is shattered. The island of Hormuz falls.
But the broader conflict does not end on the 4th of May. The geopolitical center of gravity simply shifts further north up the Persian Gulf, leading to a final chapter defined by extreme pragmatism.
The surviving Portuguese naval forces, battered but not entirely destroyed, retreat south to Muscat, located on the coast of Oman. Muscat becomes their new regional headquarters.
Over the subsequent decade, they launched several naval raids attempting to disrupt the trade at Bandar Abbas and recapture Hormuz, but all these attempts fail.
The economic reality takes root. The center of global trade permanently shifts away from the island to the mainland port.
Safavid Persia finally achieves its core objective. The state controls its own economic destiny and directly collects its own transit taxes.
Buoyed by the massive influx of wealth and the victory at Hormuz, Shah Abbas decides to push his military advantage.
He directs his modernized army westward.
In 1624, he launches the Euphrates-Tigris campaign. The Safavid forces march into Mesopotamia, successfully capturing the city of Baghdad from the Ottomans.
Abbas does not stop at Baghdad. He continues moving his forces south along the river systems.
His ultimate strategic goal is to capture the port city of Basra, located where the rivers meet the Gulf.
If the Safavids take Basra, they will completely dominate the entire coastline of the Persian Gulf, locking out the Ottomans entirely.
The Ottoman Pasha, governing Basra, analyzes the approaching Safavid army and realizes his local garrison cannot withstand a siege by Abbas's artillery.
Desperate for reinforcements, he sends an urgent appeal for military assistance.
And the faction he begs for help is the Portuguese Navy.
And the commander who answers that call is Frere de Andrade.
Having survived his perilous swim at Surat, he navigated his way back to the Portuguese command structure in Oman.
He is dispatched to Basra, arriving with a flotilla of heavily armed, shallow draft galleots, perfectly suited for river combat.
The sources describe the resulting battle. The Portuguese naval forces positioned their galleots in the narrow waterways and marshes surrounding Basra.
As the Safavid land army approaches the city, attempting to secure crossing points over the rivers, the Portuguese flotilla unleashes a devastating, sustained artillery bombardment.
The Safavids, lacking any naval cover in the complex river delta, suffer heavy casualties from the concentrated cannon fire.
Unable to cross the water under bombardment, the Safavid army is forced to halt its advance and eventually retreat.
The intervention of the Portuguese flotilla essentially saves the city of Basra for the Ottoman Empire.
The geopolitical whiplash in this sequence of events is jarring.
You're looking at a scenario where the Safavids allied with Protestant Christians, the English, to defeat Catholic Christians, the Portuguese, at Hormuz.
Barely 2 years later, those same Catholic Christians ally with Sunni Muslims, the Ottomans, to defeat Shia Muslims, the Safavids, at Basra.
It perfectly illustrates the cold reality of early modern statecraft.
Ideology, religious affiliation, and historical grievances were frequently utilized as rhetoric to motivate troops or justify conflicts to the public.
However, when the survival of a state or vital economic interests were immediately at stake, strict pragmatism dictated military policy.
The Portuguese recognized that if Basra fell to the Safavids, Their remaining access to the lucrative Mesopotamian trade routes would be severed.
The Ottomans recognized that without Portuguese naval guns, they would lose their southern province.
The profound theological differences between Lisbon and Istanbul became entirely irrelevant in the face of Safavid expansion.
By the 1630s, the energy drains out of the century-long conflict. The borders solidify and the treasuries are exhausted.
Formal truces are negotiated and signed.
The Portuguese are eventually allowed to establish a minor trading post at Bandar Kong on the Iranian coast to facilitate limited commerce. But their era of absolute regional hegemony is permanently broken.
They stabilized their presence in Oman for several more decades and maintain a degree of influence in Basra, but the suffocating monopoly they held since Afonso de Albuquerque first arrived in 1507 is gone forever.
We need to evaluate the long-term consequences of this massive expenditure of blood and treasure. For the Safavids, the outcome appears to be a definitive victory.
Shah Abbas I successfully restored control over his maritime borders. By establishing Bandar Abbas, he massively enhanced the fiscal autonomy of the Persian state.
The empire was no longer bleeding its wealth to foreign toll booths stationed on an offshore island.
It was a vital achievement for Safavid state building and economic independence. However, the mechanism of their victory carried a hidden long-term cost.
By inviting the English East India Company into the Persian Gulf to provide the naval artillery they lacked, the Safavids inadvertently planted the seeds for centuries of British colonial dominance in the region.
The EIC transitioned from a group of frustrated merchants seeking silk into entrenched regional power brokers.
You solve an immediate crisis by inviting a heavily armed corporation into your territorial waters. The Portuguese threat is neutralized, but the English presence becomes permanent and infinitely more powerful over the next 2 centuries.
The transition of power was irrevocable. There is a final detail in the sources regarding the Portuguese presence. Long after their imperial power had faded, in 1728, a small Portuguese force actually launched a minor, localized raid on the island of Qeshm.
The sources frame it as an insignificant action. It resulted in a few casualties and the capture of some minor goods, but it marks the absolute final Portuguese military operation in the Persian Gulf.
It is a faint, almost unrecognizable echo of Albuquerque's massive armadas.
We return to the fundamental conflict driving this history. We witness 2 vastly different types of empires clashing on the shoreline.
Shah Abbas I proved to be a brilliant tactician and a ruthless pragmatist.
He successfully utilized foreign naval power to solve his immediate strategic problem of capturing an impenetrable island fortress.
But in executing that strategy, he institutionalized a European maritime foothold in the Gulf that would ultimately outlast his own dynasty.
It leaves you with a critical question regarding statecraft. When a land empire relies entirely on a foreign maritime power to police its own waters, who truly holds the power in the long run?
Thank you for listening, History Maps. Learn history visually.